All right, well, it is 2 minutes after the hour. Let's go ahead and get this started. Thanks everybody for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about economic development in our region. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen so you all can see our slides. Get those going. All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Fantastic. Like I said, thank you all for being here to talk about comprehensive economic development strategies for here in the Kennebec Valley region. The CEDS plan is administered by the Economic Development Administration. So one of the things I'd like to mention right off the bat is that this plan covers all of Somerset County, Kennebec County, and parts of Western Waldo County. And that doesn't mean that we don't necessarily consider economic development and what's happening in adjacent regions, but this plan is active in those places. Ole, would you like to introduce what we're going to be doing today?
Why, thank you. So I'm Ole Amundsen, and I'm the relatively new Executive Director of Kennebec Valley Council of Governments. I started in January. And the CEDS plan is really our formative economic development plan for the entire region. And basically, it has a shelf life of about 5 years. Our plan has not expired yet. So now is the time to re-examine it and refresh it and kind of take a look at it. And we have drafted a diverse set of stakeholders, that's you, to help us in this process. And we're going to be taking a look at what the current plan is, a timeline for revising our plan. We're going to be looking at our vision statement, and then we're also going to be previewing a survey that you'll be responsible for completing over the next couple of weeks. So we want to give you a sneak peek of it and answer any of your questions about it. So that's a little bit about what we're going to do this afternoon. We try to schedule these meetings either kind of early in the morning or late in the afternoon so that a variety of different stakeholders can make it and kind of to be open to that. So that's a little bit about our strategy there. So our next meeting will be in June, and it'll be starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we try to play both sides of the time spectrum. I'd like to also introduce other KVCOG staff who are on the call. So we have Kate Raymond, who's our basically member services and communications manager. And we are a member organization. All the communities, that we have about 60 member communities in both Kennebec and Somerset County and Waldo County. And so Kate is responsible for being our key liaison out in the field there. And she also does all of our marketing and social media. So she's a very busy person. And then Will Harper is one of our 2 resiliency planners. We were very fortunate that the Economic Development Authority gave us a really generous grant to hire 2 resiliency planners to help out during the pandemic and help with these sorts of projects and help our communities basically get through this very troubled waters. So Will has added a lot of horsepower to our staff and has been doing an excellent job. So I will turn it over now to Will, and we'll do a quick round of introductions, I believe.
Very good. Thank you everybody for being here. Again, my name is Will. If everybody could just go around and tell us your name and who you're representing today. So I'll go through and pick on people. And starting in my screen, Joy, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Joy McKenna. I'm Director of Marketing and Communications at Maine General Health, and I'm the immediate past president of the Mid-Maine Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. So I'm still on the board, and I'm the chair of the Public Policy Committee there. And hi to everybody.
Thanks, Joy. Dan Patterson, do you want to get us kicked off in the second row?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Dan Patterson. I work for Hudemaki here in Waterville. I am the shipping and warehouse manager and new to this group. Very excited to be a part of this.
Great. Thanks, Dan. John?
Guessing I'm the only John. If not, I'll jump in before in any other one. Good afternoon, John Butera. I'm Vice President, Commercial Loan Officer at Skowhegan Savings Bank. I'm not new to CEDS. I've actually did quite a bit of this in a previous life, several previous lives. Most directly involved with KVCOG was when I was a Central Maine Growth Council Executive Director, I guess way back now, and was on the CEDS process. And I've pretty much spent my entire professional career in economic development, and still consider myself doing economic development because we're trying to help the business community grow and prosper, particularly for me here in Central Maine. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
Sorry,
Vandermeulen.
Kim Vandermeulen.
Oh, thank you, Kim Vandermeulen. I live in Wayne, work in Winthrop. I work for Alternative Manufacturing, which is a electronics manufacturing firm on the tip of Maranacook Lake. As a second job, my wife and I opened Vanderbrew Craft Brewery in the same building about 2 years ago. So I can walk down the hall and brew beer and come back and make electronics. Served on the Winthrop Lakes Regional Chamber of Commerce Board for many years, Kennebec Valley Chamber of Commerce Board for quite a long time. And along with a bunch of other folks in Winthrop, we want to see that economy grow. So I'm excited to join this group. This is my first meeting with the group.
Thanks. Kim Lin Loft, do you want to follow up?
Sure. Hi, sorry about that. I'm used to being the only Kim in the room, and Butera didn't know who they were talking about because we always call him Butera because it's always more than one John. I'm Kim Lin Loft. I've been with the chamber in this position for 20 years. Been with the chamber in one capacity or another for the last 27. I also am the executive director of the Central Maine Growth Council, doing its back office oversight, and been involved since day one with CEDS, so kind of a lifer.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kim. Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Boyer with United Way of Kennebec Valley. I am just filling in tonight for our Executive Director, Courtney Yeager, who got called into another meeting.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Jean.
Hi, it's Jean Dempster. I'm based at University of Maine in Augusta. I help out with workforce issues throughout Kennebec and Somerset and Western Waldo. But my prime work is working with micro businesses in the startup phase throughout our region. And I guess that's it. And I have been on part of this group for many years, off and on. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you. Katie Doherty.
Hello, I am Katie Doherty, the president and CEO of the Kennebec Valley Chamber. Been here for about 5 years, but this is my first time going through the CEDS process with you guys.
Well, great to have you. Brian.
Hello, my name is Brian Eng, and I apologize in advance if you hear any strange sounds. My son is playing Nintendo in the background and has not seemed to be able to turn the volume down despite my repeated requests. I'm excited to see Kim Vandermeulen and John Butera on this group. I've enjoyed interacting with them in the past, though they may not remember me. But my role on this committee is as the development manager for a project called 24 Court Street in Skowhegan, which is a very ambitious downtown real estate development project that has been put together by Amber Lamke, the founder of Maine Grains, which you may be familiar with. So I'm basically her representative on this effort, which we're very excited to be a part of. And I am new to this committee and to the CEDS process, but eager to learn more.
Excited to hear from you. Jim.
Jim Dinkel, I'm Executive Director of First Park in Oakland. I also live in the town of Oakland as well. I've been involved in CEDS elsewhere where I've worked in Arizona as well as in Indiana.
Fantastic. Jason, would you like to follow up?
Jason Gain, I'm President and CEO of the Skowhegan Regional Chamber. Like Katie, first time going through this process.
Glad to have people who it's their first time. I'm excited to hear from you. Christina.
Hi, Christina Cannon, Executive Director for Main Street Skowhegan. And gosh, I think I was involved because it was what, 2017? I was involved indirectly in the last CEDS planning initiative.
Well, great. I'm really glad that we have a good complement of folks who have been through the CEDS process before and some new folks. And so I'm hoping that this will be a good complement. Let's see. So I wanted to briefly touch on what is a CEDS plan. Like I just said, some people already know what a CEDS plan is. Some people are brand new. A CEDS plan, it's a plan that tries to engage economic development with sort of a broader regional approach as to what's going on in the region, what do we need, what resources do we have, and what resources do we want to find. As I mentioned earlier, CEDS is administered by the Economic Development Administration, and so there are certain requirements that they have for us in order to meet what they view as a comprehensive economic development strategy. Some of that includes a summary and a background, a SWOT analysis, which for those of you who might not know is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. We're going to be having a separate meeting to talk about those and go through the process of trying to determine what is a threat, what is a weakness, what is a strength, what is an opportunity. A strategic direction and an action plan, which tries to assemble both goals and strategies in order to meet those goals. An evaluation framework so that we can measure how much progress we're making in reaching those goals. And then finally, a new element that the EDA is looking for is touching on economic resilience. So not simply asking what do we need to do well, but what do we need to do well and be happy and healthy and have a bigger complement for that broader picture. And so some of that might include steady state sort of approaches, which are trying to keep at a long-term economic functioning, and other things that are responding to what's happening right now. A great example is the COVID pandemic. That is something that we need to have responses going, and I'm hoping that we can talk about that in this process. So our plan right now, if you haven't mentioned, I'll repost the links that I had copied earlier. And one of those is the static link to our current CEDS plan. So feel free to read through that at your leisure. It does a pretty good job of meeting those requirements for the EDA, but we are here to sort of renew that commitment. And one of the things that my colleague Robyn and I would really like to contribute to a CEDS plan is that conversation of resilience and how do we bring in these bigger picture ideas. One of the really important things that I've read about, and I'm glad that the EDA is focusing on this, is not just talking about jobs, because for a long time CEDS plans were how do we make more jobs, how do we find more jobs, and trying to broaden that conversation and talking about things like culture, community well-being, with the understanding that these are all complementary, that jobs are one part of a much broader picture. And that isn't to say that the CEDS plan will be a 200 or 300 page drive down into every aspect of our lives. It's still going to remain fairly broad, but in that we're hoping to make it applicable to a lot of the different things that we're going to be doing. So the plan for us right now is we'll be having another meeting in June to go through the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so in that, we will be discussing where do we see our future going? Where do we see threats to our success and our livelihoods? Where do we see resilience and strengths? What are the things that we do well? And what are the things that we can be improving on? In that meeting, we're going to be going through that process with everybody and touching on results from a survey that I'll be talking about later in the presentation. After that, we'll be having a meeting to discuss some of the research that we'll be putting into this. So looking at demographics, economics, income, and a lot of the other measurements that we use to sort of benchmark our economic progress. After that, we'll be having a meeting later towards the fall about projects that sort of embody this CEDS plan. How do we actually put this into motion? Do we have ideas that are ready to go? Or is this going to require some really serious thinking and looking at what our SWOT analysis came up with, what our data looks like, and also trying to take advantage of the sort of energy and ambitions that all of you bring to the table, because certainly that's a big part of it. After that, we'll be writing on our end a lot of that plan. We'll involve you in the writing and revision process. The final report is due March 31st of 2022, which seems like a long time from now, but I can tell you that it goes by quickly. So hopefully we'll keep the pace manageable but active so that we're not falling behind on that goal. So one of the first things that we wanted to talk about is vision. What is our vision for the region? And so I'll pass it along to Ole to lead everybody through this discussion.
Great. Thank you, Will, for that. And basically, one of the things, that we want to talk about is, most plans do have some sort of overarching vision statement that tries to sort of summarize, what this is all about. And, what we're going to do is kind of look at, our plan and look at the past vision statement and look at some other options in terms of that. So next slide. Yep. So one of the things is this is our current vision. It's not a vision statement. I would say it's a vision page. And it's very broad and describes the whole process and different aspects of the process of what a CEDS plan is. And it's got just a lot there. And some of you know, in previous lives, I worked as an organizational consultant, and this is not unusual that you have a very verbose kind of vision page that kind of goes on and is very broad in its scope. Next slide. I think that our neighboring county, Androscoggin Valley Council of Governments, has what I would classify as a vision statement. And you can sort of see the difference. And, it's literally a sentence, and it tries to sort of capture a lot of different things. It's broad, but it's specific. It tells you where in the United States we're focusing on. We're focusing on the tri-counties, and tells you a little bit about what's important, statements of quality in terms of a sense of place, and, sets standards in terms of standards of excellence, both in terms of business as well as it's a good place to live, and acknowledges change. It's dynamic. It realizes that it's a working document. And I think this makes for kind of a good kind of vision statement. And, what I wanted to do is spend a little bit of time kind of looking and thinking about our vision page. And if we could go back to that and just think, are there things about this that we think are phrases that are worth keeping, sections that you found particularly compelling, things of that nature? Or, should we kind of take a fresh canvas approach and try to kind of start from scratch with something that's kind of distinct and kind of starting fresh? So, again, and kind of looking at this vision page, there are some things that kind of stood out to me in terms of this document. I think the second sentence gets fairly close to a vision statement in the CEDS adopting an asset-based strategy, which I think is an interesting phrase, to promote economic growth and to expand prosperity and to foster both a resilient and sustainable regional economy. That's pretty dynamic. It's got a lot of stuff that's going on there. There's a lot of other stuff that's in here too, but that particular sentence did catch my eye. So now I'm going to call on some folks, some experienced CEDS practitioners who revealed that they have experience. So the first contestant is Jim. So how do they do it in Arizona and Indiana, Jim? And thoughts on a vision statement? What do you like about it? What would you advise?
Well, I think a vision statement is the logical first step, sort of the roadmap to guide us. In Arizona, we worked again through our Council of Governments on the CEDS report over a period of, I think, 2 years, as I recall, and met quarterly. So I think that's pretty similar to the model you're following.
Okay, all right.
I think you're on the right path.
And did you have a vision? Did you have like a vision kind of statement, or was it more verbose?
No, there was a vision statement.
Okay, very good.
I can provide that to you if you'd ever like. I can find it.
Yeah, no, those are always good to collect samples of how other regions, look at it. We can certainly learn from other parts of the country.
I'll send it to William.
Yes, very good. John, since you've been involved with CEDS before, and it's so nice to be able to say John and know I'm only talking to one person. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I agree with Jim. I think it's really important that we kind of look holistically at the region and what we're trying to do. And I think Will's earlier comments about economic development evolving, and it, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was jobs and infrastructure. And as it evolves, it's becoming more kind of layered, for lack of a better term, where there's a lot more, nuances, and it's less transactional. So I think you really need to keep that in mind as you develop that vision statement and that strategy, and then the tactics, more importantly, that will achieve the strategy. I mean, you could have all the strategies you want in the world, but at the end of the day, we may need to make sure that there's tactics and achievable tactics, and gets at that strategy. So yeah, I think getting that, again, whether it's one statement or 2 sentences, but I think it needs to be something that's clear, concise, broad enough, but yet really lays out where you want to go, the roadmap. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Kim Lin Loft.
Hey, Kim, you're muted. Sorry.
Did you just read my lips there? I just swore. Anyway, well, as I said, I've been at this particular CEDS meeting table for 20 years, so it's hard for me to see the forest through the trees because I've been doing it for so long. But I think where I see we fall short, to Butera's point, is, we've got to be able to have clear, concise, measurable goals, but then we actually have to see if we've measured them and fulfilled them, because I don't think we ever, some things may be ongoing, but some things could be measured and tracked, and we don't do well in the tracking piece, I don't think.
Fair enough. So I know, Christina Cannon, you've got a good eye towards marketing and things. What are your thoughts?
Well, my first reaction to this vision statement was that a lot of it belongs in an introductory paragraph of an introduction, perhaps, and that your vision statement that you showed after was much more of what I would picture a vision statement looking like. And then to the point about tactics, I think it was John who said this. I recently reviewed the CEDS plan for the earmarks funding request that I submitted, and I found it lacking in tactical and project-based information. It was general information that I was able to align with a project, but I think that if we were to get a little bit more, in the weeds with some specific things that are niche or appropriate or specific to our region, it would be perhaps helpful as we see these plans in action, because I don't think I'd ever referenced the CEDS before from a funding perspective, or from a funding perspective. So but being able to say, hey, this project directly relates to our CEDS and this is why it should be funded, especially as we move into a period of significant funding coming out of the federal government, I think it would be helpful. So.
That's a really good point. And for those of you who don't know, KVCOG is the administrator for the Northern Border Regional Commission grants. And last Friday was a big deadline for infrastructure grants. So I was everyone's new best friend as people were calling us, and they were asking for copies of the CEDS plan because they wanted to make reference to it. And some of them, you know, were hoping that there was a project in there that they could cite. That's not uncommon for a CEDS plan to be used that way as a reference document, as an additional kind of blessing, if you will, for federal or state funding, because if it makes it into the CEDS plan, you know, that's a pretty good kind of threshold. I think what we don't want is for it to be a 3-inch thick ring binder of a list of 500 projects that becomes kind of diluted. But I do think some projects are very appropriate because they have regional significance. They can really move the ball for the economy, for quality of life in all sorts of ways. And they're illustrative of what we're trying to do. So I think it is good to still have projects listed in there, and it can be a very helpful document in that way. I'm going to call on one more person. Jean, I think you had mentioned that you had been involved with this before. So.
Yeah, so I also think, you know, this is great information in the statement, but a 1 or 2 sentence vision statement would be great. And what has always appealed to me about being part of this group is the complexity of having several larger towns, Augusta, Waterville, Skowhegan, where there's a lot going on, but also all the very small towns that look to the KVCOG for guidance, funding, learning what is out there to help their towns. I live in China, and I've worked a lot in with Pittsfield, Vassalboro, to move forward too. So I think it's we have a unique region in that we have some kind of major towns and then so many small towns that want that quality of life, and they want to be able to have that sustained economy in those towns and rural areas.
That's a good story. You know, our service territory is truly a land of contrast. You know, we have urbanity and extreme rural kind of wilderness areas and everything in between. And, you know, I do think that that's true. And then we have, you know, we have businesses which are also, we have, you know, Dan on the phone from Huhtamaki, you know, a multinational corporation, large manufacturing interest, and then we have a small business owner. And so that's also kind of true in terms of, you know, the scale of commercial enterprises as well. So it is a challenge because the plan tries to be relevant to these different audiences. Anyone else have some comments that they'd like to share about the current vision statement and thoughts on it? Okay.
I'd actually like to put some comments out there.
Sure.
One of the things that I find so fascinating about something like a vision statement is it, in general, it asks us to look at whatever system we're looking at and ask, what is it we're hoping that it achieves? And so if we, for example, ask ourselves, what should an economy achieve? Some people might say jobs, some people might say income, but I think those are sort of indirect, a job brings income, that's great. But, you know, we don't necessarily work jobs for a job's sake. We work jobs because we have lives, we have aspirations, we have, you know, desire to be with friends and family, to enjoy the environment, to live our lives. And so I'm in my thinking that a vision statement should ask us and help us sort of navigate the why of all of this. You know, economic development can be somewhat divorced from that purpose. And when we're creating goals like employment goals and income goals, they're really sort of proxies for other sorts of things that are much harder and much more effusive, like happiness, community well-being, And so that, it's one of those things to think about when you're writing a vision statement, to think about what's the big picture purpose for this.
Great. So Will, you're going to take it away for an overview of our current CEDS plan and how we're doing.
Sure, if I can just find my unmute button. So yeah, I'd like to take a few minutes to just talk about some of the goals that I just mentioned that were set out in our last CEDS plan and where we've landed. Again, I mentioned very early on that the sort of geographic scope of this plan is Somerset County, Kennebec County, and Western Waldo County. There is a decision in the previous plan to omit Waldo County from a lot of that analysis, but my intention is to both provide county level data as well as town level data. That way we can get a little bit more granularity. One of the things, and feel free to chime in if this will be helpful, one of the things that we discussed was actually providing this sort of information in a website or some sort of digital format, so that a CEDS plan doesn't read like 150 pages of tables of data, that it's a little bit more interactive, it's a little bit more helpful. So Christina, if you're, for example, looking for information for a specific project, it could be there and it could be readily accessible. Just to go over this plan, it articulated a lot of different aspirations and a lot of different goals related to demographics, related to the economy. Some of the broader phenomenon that we were touching on in that plan are things like the baby boom generation and what's called the baby boom echo, of the millennials, to which I belong, and how that impacts our economy. Our economy is also involved in sort of global shifts in production. A lot of our region was heavily involved in forestry and paper production, and that's not as big a component of our state's economy. It's certainly not nothing, but our economies have shifted and continue to do so. So one of the first things to talk about, sorry, this isn't my slideshow, so I'm just getting caught up. I guess the first thing we'll talk about, population. In the previous plan, there was a goal to exceed 185,500 people in Kennebec and Somerset County. That's a tricky goal for a few different reasons. And you can see the graph that I put in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. Following the 2008-2009 economic crisis, there was sort of a time lag between when that really happened nationally and when it really started hitting Maine hard. And so this dip in population you see, we have essentially found ourselves where we were back in 2010 population-wise. This doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty of where people live. My intuition is that there has also been a shift away from some of the more rural parts of our region into some of the more urban parts of our region. And that's difficult to see in overall population, but it's certainly something we're going to be exploring in the data analysis. Employment. So in this, may
I say something, Will?
Go ahead.
Garvin's done a lot of that data analysis, at least for Kennebec County, because he needed to for a grant or something.
Sure.
So you might want to tap into him a little bit or ask him so that you don't just duplicate the wheel. One of the things that we had feared was the growth, particularly in the greater Waterville area, was going to be driven by low income socioeconomic demographics, and it actually wasn't.
Interesting.
There was a higher median household income that matched with the increase in population. So anyway, as opposed to trying to do it again, you might want to just ask G.
Yeah, I'll do that. That's interesting that you bring that up. One of the things that I'll contribute is that so being mobile, physically mobile, oftentimes people tend to be in the upper ends of the socioeconomic spectrum. And so for a state like Maine that really relies on an influx of migration, we would tend to see that we would be bringing in people who have some of that higher levels of income. And so I'm really curious, one of the things that I'd like to delve into is we've all heard stories about people from New York, from California, from all over the country moving to Maine during the pandemic because they want to live here. In some places I've seen estimates from CBER that say something like 120% increase over 2019 figures. And so I would be really curious about not only who they are, but where are they moving? Are they moving to Waterville? Are they moving to Fairfield and Augusta and Skowhegan? Or are they moving to some of the smaller towns in our region? It's an interesting subject, and I could talk about it for hours. Okay, so talking about employment, the goals that were set out in the last CEDS plan were to increase employment from 82,227, which is very specific, to 84,000 workers. We got close. The 2020 estimates from the Bureau of Labor Statistics were 83,400, which is very nearly right on the money. The other figure that we didn't do so well in is in labor force participation. So when we're talking about increasing the number of people who are working, that's only really an important measure when we're talking about that number in relation to the entire population. So statewide, our labor force participation rate is 50%, and that's pretty typical for our country. Maine is an older state, and so one of the phenomena that we tend to see is that we have more people who are retired who aren't in the labor force, and thereby bringing down that labor force participation rate. Whether that should be the overall driving focus of future plans, I'll leave that up to all of you. But we fall well short of our goal of raising labor force participation to 63%, where we only got to into the 40s and very low 50s in Waldo County. Income is another interesting measure. The original goals in the previous plan were based on 2015 ACS data. And so for those of you who haven't heard that, American Community Survey is one of the products that the census provides ACS. So when you see me mentioning ACS data, that's what I'm talking about. The benchmarks that were given in the previous plan were $24,000 roughly for per capita income and $47,000 for median household income. Those have increased, but compared to the benchmarks that we see with the state, we still lag the state by a certain degree. Now, that is tied into things like cost of living, and we all know that there's a really big difference between making $54,000 and living in Portland, or making $54,000 and living in Bangor. And so moving forward into data analysis for our current CEDS plan, I really like to try to incorporate that sort of cost of living, because it's a big part of our region. Like Ula said, we have big differences in business. We also have big differences in our economies, both in the very small local and rural economies and the much larger economies towards Augusta and Waterville. This one I separated into two slides because I have some great things to show. So I mentioned the baby boom and the baby boom echo. This has been a big conversation piece for a lot of demographers and a lot of people talking about economic development, because as people age and retire, they're no longer contributing things like income tax into our system. And there are other elements to economic growth that are tied in. If people retire from a job, how are we going to fill that job if there are simply not enough people to do so? And so this has been a really important element to a lot of these discussions. And it's something that I'm really interested in, because I fall within that demographic of millennials that we're talking about. So my parents were of the baby boom generation. And here I am in Maine, filling in the spot where it seems like fewer people in this demographic are. And this is something I've heard talked about in a lot of rural places in Maine. And so to put some visuals to this discussion, you can see the two graphs on the right are national population distribution. On the bottom is 2014 ACS data, and on the top is 2017 ACS data. Each one of these bars represents a 5-year demographic. And so the sample period for the bottom, everybody in one bar in the bottom should be in the next bar on the top. So it should be proceeding from left to right. I'm not sure how this looks on your screens, but the green dot represents the sort of baby boom echo, the millennial generation, and the red dot represents the baby boomers generation. And so you can see in these two graphs, the peaks of those populations shift over one. If you look on the two charts to the left where we're looking at Maine population, we have a big cohort of people who are 15 to 19 years old, but after that demographic, there seems to be a sort of cavity where there should be another peak of people in their 20s and 30s where it's just simply not there. And so rather than showing a procession of people in their 20s and 30s becoming, 25 and 35, a lot of those people are simply not present in this demographic distribution. And so when we talk about this phenomenon in Maine, this is really typical of a lot of places in Maine. And so moving into the CEDS plan, we're going to be talking about whether attracting young people is how are we going to do that? How should we focus our policies, our initiatives, our ambitions to sort of even out that demographic profile? And that doesn't necessarily mean that our success hinges on young people. It makes it much easier if young people are in that picture. Education is another really important measure for economic productivity. It's one of those things that has been it's been a touchstone of a lot of historic CEDS efforts to increase access to education, affordability of education, but also to sort of streamline the systems between education and employment. Speaking as somebody who recently earned a master's degree and I'm now in a job where I'm using that master's degree, it's really important for us to be asking those big questions of, are we actually meeting the needs for businesses here? Do we have a lot of people who have a lot of potential who could maybe retrain or focus their careers through education in a way to meet those needs? So the previous benchmark was that they were hoping to increase college educated adults, which they defined as people who had earned a bachelor's degree or more, to 31,500. And we did quite well in that. So in the 2019 ACS estimate, we reached 30,808 people. And so that's a very positive sort of takeaway from that measure, that we're getting to those numbers that we had originally thought would be prudent. Sort of embedded in education is also the discussion of things like living wages and cost of living, and trying to really piece together the bigger puzzle of are we creating happy, healthy, well-earning adults who are in jobs that are fulfilling, but also are we meeting the sort of economic needs and economic niches that we have here in Maine? So when we talk about asset-based development, that's one of those conversations where we're looking at what we have, how do we leverage what we have, but there's also other discussions of, well, what do we need? What can we add to augment those assets? And so education is one of those things. We have access to education and we can use that to implement other things and leverage those assets, so we're making the most of what we have at our disposal. So before I move on, does anybody have any questions or comments or a need to discuss some of those demographic and economic measurements that I just talked about? All right, hearing none. So the next bit of work that we're going to be doing together is talking about what our focuses should be. So in the previous plan, there were identified a number of areas that we called focus areas. And so in that asset-based cluster development, which I just mentioned, the cluster is in identifying complementary businesses. And so, for example, production and manufacturing with shipping, and to make sure that we're finding those synergies where they exist. And for example, in instances where, for example, a business might be importing a product or a good, where we can actually produce those in state, trying to identify those clusters of production and those clusters of strengths that we have in order to make them work better together. Another one is entrepreneurship and innovation. Education and workforce, access to capital, these are all things that we can agree that are very important elements. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to get at, are these still the central parts of what our economic development focus should be? To that end, we put together a survey to sort of talk about, are these measurements really measuring what we asked them to? Are there things that we're missing? And trying to get more information about how you all feel and where you think our priorities should be. So the survey is going to be sent out on Friday. That's going to include a lot of questions asking about, for example, if we're going to prioritize broadband expansion, who should we prioritize first? If we're interested in attracting young people, how are we going to do that? And I'm hoping that you all take a minute to do that survey, but also to think really critically about, what do you see in your communities? What do you see in your colleagues and in your partner organizations? What do you think they're going to benefit the most from? But also feel free to add editorial, commentary. If you feel very strongly that we should be prioritizing this way, feel free to answer that way. And of course, in that we include an opportunity for you to reach out to us and let us know if you want to be part of more in-depth discussions, and we're willing to do that on our end. And like I said, that will be distributed by Friday. We're hoping that you'll all have the time to complete it by June the 4th. Again, it sounds like a long time from now, but it probably wouldn't be as long a time period. And then following up on that, we'll be doing our SWOT meeting to discuss strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that will be on June 17th at 8 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. We're in an effort to try to include people who have different schedules. We're sort of moving the time frame around, but feel free to let us know if that works for you all. Certainly there are some people who might not be able to make an 8 a.m. meeting, but feel free to let us know about your availability, and we'll do everything we can. You won't get behind on anything. We won't leave you out of these discussions. But we just want you to feel that you have an opportunity to be represented in one way or another. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Well, that's really great. We do appreciate your participation in this first kickoff meeting. I know that many of you are incredibly busy professionals, and we pledge to only have 4 meetings. And this survey. So we're trying to be relatively light on your time in terms of that, because I know that some of these planning processes can be really intensive, but we've tried to be respectful of your time. So I think that will be fairly straightforward in terms of this. And again, we're just at the beginning. No one's missed anything. We have our next meeting is going to be set in June, and you'll be getting the survey on Friday. If you have any questions about the survey, please, send along your questions to Will or Robyn or myself, and we'll try to get back to you in terms of, clarifying things or anything like that. And then we look forward to gathering in June via Zoom and kind of doing some strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities analysis, which is a key component of the plan. Any other thoughts or questions this afternoon? All right. Well, thank you for turning out on a wonderful afternoon, and we will be in touch on Friday with the survey, and we'll see you in June.
And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.